Meeting to order, do a little special presentation and special pledge. But before we do that, we're going to do something even a little further different. Before we have the Scouts of Troop 321 lead us through the pledge, I want to share something about today and specifically tomorrow. Philosophers and historians describe peace as an ideal whose existence we deduce from the pauses between wars. We pray for peace, but we prepare for conflict because, unfortunately, it's part of the human condition. Not all differences can be settled amicably or through negotiation, because while it takes two to communicate, it only takes one to pick a fight. Tomorrow is Veterans Day, when we honor those who put themselves between our nation and war's desolation. We are opening tonight's meeting in honor of all those brave men and women who stood ready and stood up to defend us. So when you say the pledge tonight, along with the gentleman from Troop 321, please remember our vets and all the men and women currently serving in our armed services who helped make it possible for those words to actually mean something. So with that, if Troop 321 would like to lead us all in the pledge, we'll get the meeting started. Thank you, gentlemen. First item of business, do we have any changes to the order of the agenda, Jeff?
No changes from staff this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Any changes requested from the dais? Hearing none, we will move on to a report from closed session. Greg.
There are no reportable items from closed session, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Greg. We'll move on to council communications and announcements. We'll start with council members first. Cameron.
Thank you, Mark. The main thing to report on is I attended a San Mateo County Library Governing Board meeting this morning. Not too much to report. The main focus of conversation was the financial reserve policy, and I'm happy to report that the library is in very good financial standing, saving over 20% this year for general fund reserves. The main other topic of conversation was the desire to build a new library in Half Moon Bay. They're envisioning a very large, I believe close to 30,000 square foot library. We got a presentation. It's a beautiful, beautiful design. Unfortunately, there was a revenue measure on the Half Moon Bay ballot in November, just last week, which did not pass, which puts the project a bit into question. But there still is optimism, and we're looking for creative sources of funding. So that's my main report for tonight.
Thank you, Cameron. Ron. Not Ron, excuse me. Matt. That's a pump fake by mistake.
The only thing I have to report is just a meeting today with the folks from, one representative anyways, Tony Bullock, at the Black Mountain Water property, doing a field trip, if you will, of that property.
Thank you, Matt. Bob.
Mr. Mayor, tonight I had two items. Attended a Silicon Valley Clean Water Commission meeting the other day, and the project to replace almost the entire facility down there is proceeding. There are some public hearings that are going to be scheduled concerning where to put a 48-inch pipe, but it really doesn't affect directly San Carlos, I think, but it is affect Redwood Shores. And I only mention it because there may be people that know people or whatever are still just interested in where it might go. And so those public hearings are going to be, or public meetings are going to be coming up. We want to get a lot of input to figure out where to put the pipe. And the other item I have is there's a public workshop on December 9th put on by the City and County Association of Government, CCAG, and it's related to the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan for the environs of the San Carlos Airport. And what that means basically is people coming to talk about noise, safety, airspace protection, and overflight, land use, and other items. It's an open house type situation. It will be held from 5 to 7 p.m. on Tuesday, December 9th at the San Carlos Library, Room A. It's going to be an open session, so there's not going to be a formal presentation, but there's going to be a chance for the public to talk to folks one-on-one and share information and concerns. And you can come at any time during the 2-hour open house. It doesn't start at, it starts at 5, but there's no program, as I said before. For more information, you can go to the website, which would be www.alucp-sancarlosairport.com. So I wanted to make sure people were aware of that in December. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Bob. Now, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of items. I attended a Four Corners working group meeting last Monday, a week ago today, and the Four Corners working group is a collection of members from the San Carlos City Council, Belmont City Council, San Carlos School District, and Sequoia High School District. And the sole purpose of this group is to try to get a handle and solve the traffic issues surrounding Carlmont High School, where San Carlos Avenue meets Alameda. That anybody who's driven by there at 8 o'clock in the morning on a school morning knows the horrendous traffic issues that surround that area. Anyway, we've been working for several years now. In fact, I think this group predates my time on the council, but I felt that last week we made some significant progress. We had a report from the traffic consultant, and we believe that we're going to make some significant progress towards getting a real solution that'll probably come up early next year. We'll have some community meetings both in San Carlos and in Belmont, and we may have some solutions within the next year. So slow process, but we're getting there. And then the second thing I wanted to report on, I don't usually report on this because not a lot of interesting things happen there other than the opportunity to meet with council members from other cities, but we have these Council of Cities dinners on a monthly basis, and all elected officials from San Mateo County usually attend, supervisors and council members. And the mayor of Burlingame at this last meeting brought up the fact that a friend of his who's a tenant and a fairly well-paid professional, and Mark was there as well. I think he might remember this, and I might get the numbers wrong, but what he mentioned was that this was a fairly well-paid individual who his rent was something like $3,000 a month in a apartment he lives in Burlingame, and his landlord came to him and said, "By the way, your rent's going up next week or next month to $5,700, which when you work out the math is a 90% increase in rent. And to me, that just highlights the continuing crisis we have in Bay Area in general and the San Mateo County in particular, not only in affordable housing, but in housing in general. And it just sort of was served as a reminder to me that this is something that we just continue to need to pay attention to and hopefully make some progress on, not only in the county, but in San Carlos, which specifically we can do something about. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ron.
Councilmember Collins, questions, please?
Sure.
I spoke to Councilmember Stone of Belmont, and he indicated that you did make some progress in the Four Corners.
Yes.
He sort of alluded to the fact because I wasn't at the meeting, the progress was being made. And I just wanted to make sure that that wasn't the case. So.
Oh, if this is an attempt to get yourself unassigned, it's not going to work.
I know. No, I'm being somewhat facetious, obviously. But could I get a copy of that report that you guys got? I didn't.
You know what? I haven't gotten it yet, but I think it's coming. I think Jay Walter is going to be getting it to all of us.
Sorry, I thought you might have gotten it. So.
No, if I get it, you get it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
I forgot to mention that Councilmember Grisilli is also a member of this committee.
Thank you, gentlemen. No, not a problem at all. I just had a few items to report on. I had the opportunity last week to represent the city at the topping ceremony for the new construction at Central Middle School, which was a lot of fun. Never been to one of those before. That's where they set the last beam in place at the top of the second-story building that they're building. Everybody who was in attendance got an opportunity to sign the beam, which was nice, and they didn't drop the beam on anybody, which was even better. So that was a nice little event. Also, last week I had an opportunity to attend. Unfortunately, I had to leave early, but most of the day-long seminar that Rethink Waste, the group that oversees the recology and recycling operations in the South County, put on about diversion. This is a very important topic throughout California. because landfills are filling up, and we need to encourage people to do more recycling and more composting and whatnot. And I'm pleased to say San Carlos is actually ahead of the curve on a lot of that stuff already. But one important thing I wanted to mention to my colleagues is we have all heard about the goal that the state set of a 75% diversion by 2020, which for the benefit of the audience means that by 2020 the state wants 3/4 of everything that we consume to not, and we throw out, to not end up in the landfill, to end up either in composting or recycling. We are currently probably at about 50% overall, maybe a little bit higher than that. So we would have a way to go, but it turns out that is just a goal. The actual legal requirement is 50%. That's been something I've been trying to get nailed down for quite some time. And I do think we need to increase our diversion, but it's nice to know that we have a little bit more runway to do that. Like Matt, I also had an opportunity to go on a tour of the Black Mountain properties today, which was very enlightening, and I appreciate Tony Bullock and Al Savé taking the time to walk me through it. Last but not least, a little public apology to the proprietor of Susie Cakes, one of our new businesses on Laurel Street. I was unfortunately not able to attend the ribbon cutting ceremony on Saturday, but I understand everybody had a good time consuming the product without me, which is fine. So I plan on going down there and indulging myself one of these days. With that, we'll go to Jeff for any staff comments on city administration business.
I don't have any updates for the council or the community this evening.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. That takes us to item 6A, the first of two presentations. We're hearing first one from Chet Mulaka, the San Carlos Library Annual Report. Good evening, Chet.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor Olbert and San Carlos City Council members. It is my pleasure to present the 2013-2014 San Mateo County Library Annual Report for the San Carlos Library. The year in San Carlos was an extremely busy one. We served a monthly average of 24,000 patrons. Our recent interior renovation has proved an asset reflecting both the library's commitment to innovation and the desire to accommodate increased access. The new, more open, flexible, and inviting interior space now allows library staff to provide a growing and more varied list of community programs. Weekly, the San Carlos Library hosted an average of 20 public programs with a yearly attendance totaling over 20,000. The library is a continuing destination for literacy, tutoring, career, health, and cultural programs, as well as a new destination for the maker movement with the addition of our 2 new 3D printers. The library hosted 2 tricycle music fests since our grand reopening last November in collaboration with San Francisco and other peninsula libraries. This fest has attracted participation by Grammy Award-winning musicians this year. These successes have encouraged us to provide the community with an increased number of music programs. In fact, the San Carlos Library's first Eclectic Jazz Festival is planned for April of 2015. The library's provision of electronic services continues to expand. This year, we have added feature films, shorts, and documentaries streaming services from PBS, Criterion, and IndieFlix. Our downloadable book collection for e-readers is expanding, with San Carlos patrons representing the #1 user group in the county library system. The library is excited about visual art. Our recently installed Artomat dispenses original paintings, drawings, and crafts via a repurposed 1960s-era vending machine. San Carlos Library is now among a prestigious group of institutions, including the Smithsonian, Whitney Museum of American Art, San Francisco Exploratorium, and the Crocker Art Museum, providing this experience. We continue to hold museum lectures with topics highlighting current area museum exhibits provided by art scholars. The San Carlos Library is very fortunate to be the beneficiary of patrons and supporters like Gwen and Tashofer, whose estate financed the Artomat. But most of all, it is through the continuing commitment of the Friends of the San Carlos Library and their fundraising efforts that we have the financial foundation to make the library a comfortable and welcoming place for our guests and be able to provide so many enriching community programs. The library friends, all of our dedicated volunteers, and the support of the City of San Carlos allow us to open our doors to both new ideas and maintain the traditional role of the library as a source for books. Yes, besides the many new and unique aspects of the library I've outlined tonight, we still have books. To conclude my report, I'd like to thank the mayor, members of the City Council, city staff, and the community for their attention this evening and for your continuing library support. The full County Library Annual Report can be found on our website, smcl.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Chet. Anybody have any questions for Chet? All right. Thank you very much for coming and for the report. Our next presentation is actually part of the reason we have so many guests in the audience tonight. We're presenting proclamations to Grant Wilson and Robert Goldie for earning their Eagle Scout Awards. And I'm going to come out down into the well in a moment to do that. After we do that, we'll give each of you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your project. So, It's always fun to hand out proclamations, but I actually have to admit I always enjoy these ones in particular, just because it's such a great accomplishment. It means an awful lot because of what you've done over the years to get to this point, and what you're doing for the community as well. And I don't want to take too much of the stage here, so because I want everybody to have an opportunity to hear from each of you about stuff. So if I can just present these one by one. First to Robert. Robert, here's the proclamation for you, recognizing the work that you did, and we're going to give you a chance to talk about it in a second. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And Grant, thank you very much. There's his back. Would you each like to come up and say a few words, address the audience a little bit, and our audience out in the ether about that?
My name is Robert Goldie, and I'm a junior at Carlmont High School. My Eagle project was done at Ardenwood Historic Farms in Newark. I chose Ardenwood because I volunteered there for a few years with my family. I love working on the railroad there, running the trains, doing maintenance, all that kind of stuff. And my project was basically improvements for the Deer Park Station, which you can see in the pictures. One of them being a safety improvement was to extend a fence about 30 feet to separate the public walkway from the tracks, just to keep people away from the trains when coming into the station. And that's especially important when the park is very busy, when there's thousands of people there. And then another big portion of my project was the bulletin board. It posts train times, volunteer, how to volunteer, information from the park, anything like that we can put in there now. And it's got a nice little cover for it so it doesn't get wet. I also took out a wood plankway crossing because it was kind of splintering and hard to roll wheelchairs and strollers across, and we put in a gravel one instead. Of course, I had many volunteers helping me shovel all the gravel. And finally, there's a dual gauge display at the station, which was missing one piece of rail, so we just found a piece of rail in the park and spiked it down to complete the display. So not only were there safety improvements, there are also displays for the public to enjoy while at the station. And the project was about 330 total hours, 100 hours I did by myself, but I couldn't have done it without 200 hours of about 13 volunteers from the troop, my relatives, and my family and friends. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Grant Wilson. I'm a senior at St. Francis High School. So for my project, I helped install landscape timbers into the side of the hill between Alameda and the St. Charles Parish. I kind of got the idea for the project when a few friends of mine who also attended the St. Charles School had to walk this path every day to get to school, and they always talked about a little how dangerous it was, especially when it was raining. So I decided to put landscaping timbers into the hill to help improve the safety of going up and down, and also by laying base rock between the timbers to improve traction.
Excellent. You know, I know, as you said, quite a few people who use that pathway. So,
Yeah.
and that they will now be able to think of you every time they do and don't fall down. So, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Did anybody from the dais also wish to make any comments, or?
Well, I'll only say that being a former Boy Scout who fell 3 merit badges short of Eagle Scout, I'm always impressed with your accomplishments. It is not easy. It's just not easy. But my problem was that age caught up to me. So anybody that does it today, my hat's off to you. You've done a wonderful job. Congratulations.
Is it too late for you guys to help Ron earn his badge?
There's still time, Ron.
Yeah, it might still be. There you go.
You might be able to
when I
get
retire.
three merit badges doing that.
Yeah.
I probably could.
Again, thank you. Thank you very much for your service to the community. That brings us to public comment. This is for items not on the agenda where people wish to address the council on. Actually, you know, if you'd like, maybe I should give a few minutes for folks who may want to leave the meeting early. We'd love to have you stay, but you're under no obligation to do so. And I'm sure you have some celebrating to do. So. Okay, as I had started to mention, this is a section public comment for folks who wish to address the council on items not on the agenda. We do ask people to limit their comments to 2 minutes each. If you have a comment on an agenda item, we will get to you when we get to the agenda item. I have 2 cards in front of me. If you wish to address us at this point, please feel free to fill out the cards, which are over at the public speaking request station, and you can turn them into Crystal, who will make sure you get in the queue. First up is Josh Wallace, followed by, I believe it's, and I apologize for mispronouncing the name, Nij May. Okay, so Josh, you're up.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members, staff. I'd like to address the preservation of the Carlos Club sign. I'm proud to be a brand new member of the San Carlos Heritage Association. Very proud. In addressing the sign, I'd first like to thank the council and staff for all their efforts on this topic to date. Your commitment to thoroughly explore every preservation option going forward is much appreciated. I understand this is an ongoing process, so I'd like to update you on the community response that has been very successful so far. I have lots of scratched out numbers because I keep getting an update on this next topic, and that is that over 651 signed petitions have been received in just 3 days. There's a comment section on this petition. The practical and sentimental outpouring of the comments speaks volumes about our community's commitment to preserve the character and the history of San Carlos. And nothing represents that sentiment better than the Carlos Club. Given my 2 minutes, I won't delve into the now 651 plus comments, but I will read an excerpt from a letter we received today. It's from the architecture critic of the San Jose Mercury News. I'm very proud of your efforts. I'm very supportive. This is an excellent sign, and it is extraordinarily rare that it survives so long. Its location on El Camino makes it all that more important, relating to the history of that important street, the value of large, eye-catching, up-to-date signs, and attracting and orienting people to that historic route. He concludes by saying, the rarity of signs of this age and the aesthetic quality of this sign make it clear that an EIR under CEQA should be conducted. Again, I want to thank you all sincerely for your efforts to save this beautiful, historically significant sign that means so much to San Carlos.
Thank you, Josh. Nij May.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Nijma. I live in San Carlos for 14 years, and for the last few years, the ecology is going up. I'm a senior, single, low-income lady. I can't afford to pay that much for ecology. And I came to the city hall from last year, and they've been saying to me, if you are on PG&E care, we're going to give you a discount on the ecology. For a year and a half, I didn't see anything. And this month, they sent me a letter that they want to hire the ecology again. I'm really, really sorry that to say I can't afford to pay this much. And if I didn't get any discount, I have to cancel my ecology. I'd rather to have a roof over my head than the ecology. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. May. Matt, I noticed your request to speak light is on. Did you?
I'll wait till after public comments. Or is that it? Is that public comment?
That is the end of it. I don't have any other cards from anybody, so I think that is the end of public comment. Thank you.
So based on the Carlos Club sign, we can't say anything about it because it's not on the agenda. And I was going to ask if it interests the rest of the council, perhaps we could put it on the agenda so we could talk about it.
I actually would be interested in that as well. My understanding is staff is actually preparing to bring something to the council. So Jeff, perhaps you might want to comment on the timing of that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Grocott. The staff has been working with special legal counsel to understand the parameters of what exactly the council's authority is. We've also been working with the property owner to discuss the current situation with the sign and getting it at least put back, all the signage, not just the main sign, everything put back into its existing condition when the business owner took over the lease of the building. So our hope is that we can get something on the council for at least a dialogue and a report type action on the next agenda. And then, we'll see where it goes from there.
All right. That brings us to approval of the consent calendar. These are items the council normally acts on en masse without discussion, although council members can ask that individual items be pulled for more detailed discussion. I'm actually going to remove items E and G from the consent calendars. Does anybody have any other items they would like to have removed? Yes, Matt.
Item I.
I.
Yeah.
Okay. If there are no other items to be removed, I'll entertain a motion for items A through D, F, H, J, and K.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve those items.
Is there a second?
I second.
There's a motion and a second. Crystal, would you call the roll, please? Yes, Greg.
Mr. Mayor, there just as our practice to read in the ordinance that was that one pulled? Excuse me. It was pulled.
She was pulled.
So we're okay to proceed, Greg? Okay. Crystal, would you call the roll, please?
I'm sorry, did I get a second on that motion?
That was Cameron.
Okay. Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. I think we can probably address these items that were pulled relatively quickly, so I'm going to act on them now. We'll take up them in order. First one is 8E. Greg, do I need to read the entire agenda item? Okay. So is there a staff presentation on that, or do we go directly to discussion?
The staff does not have a prepared presentation.
Then I will entertain a motion on item 8E.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Discussion. The question is actually a question that I had for Jay. I just want to make sure I understand the funds flow of we're borrowing money from the wastewater fund, and then at some time in the future, which fund pays the wastewater fund back, and where does the money come to do that?
Director. So the process for the funding of this project is one which the council approved rates 2 or 3 years ago that were set to begin to collect revenue for the capacity assurance program. And this project is a portion of that, and so rates put in place allowed us to begin to work on that program. This project now reaching the end of its design, and we're ready to bid it. The cost of the project right now is such that we need to borrow money from the next year of the budget, that is the 2015-16 year. That's $2 million that we need to have advanced to the current year so that we can pay for a portion of that project. Then we also need to borrow from the sewer fund reserve, which is an amount that is for all the revenue that's collected. It's held there. If it's not for capital or for operations that are sent to SVCW, that's one of our primary expenditures of sewer fund revenues. But in that second year, we're going to draw some of that sewer fund revenue back into the current year to help pay for this project. So the rates that have been approved in the last couple of years continue to add revenue to the sewer fund. So we're very much whole in the sewer fund as it relates to having the money to use, but just advancing it so that we can use the money this current year. So we're not drawing it from any other fund.
Okay. So it's simply a matter of timing.
That's correct.
Matt, I see you had a question you wanted to ask or comment.
No, that was so we could pull item I.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So clear me.
You're cleared.
Could I
Yes,
just to ask one question for Jay? So are we achieving a move up in the schedule for this project, or is it just in terms of financing? Are we actually likely to get it done faster?
Yes, we are. It's a year faster than what we had anticipated, and because of the really good consultant that we have on board and our project manager, Huy Nguyen, in engineering, we've been able to pull it in a whole year ahead of time.
That's great.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, Crystal, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. Item 8G, this one I believe, Mr.
have to
Grisilli,
recuse myself
you're going
on
to
this one.
recuse yourself, as you did last time. So I will entertain, is there a staff presentation on it? Probably not, because it's a second reading, right?
That's correct.
I will entertain a motion, but per Greg's earlier comment, please make sure you read the entire red language on the action list.
Mr. Mayor, I move we adopt Ordinance 1479, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos, adding Municipal Code Section 8.10, establishing water conservation measures in time of emergency or drought.
I second.
There's a motion and a second. Discussion? Seeing none, Crystal, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. Thank you, Bob. That brings us to item 8I, adopt a resolution approving a side letter between the City of San Carlos and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Local 829, AFSCME, exempting certain classifications from the payment of overtime. Is there a motion? Or actually, excuse me, I presume there is no staff presentation on this one, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, fine. So is there a motion on this item?
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to adopt the resolution.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion?
So the only reason I pulled it was to be sure we're not going to see this again because of what we had in closed session on the one position.
A similar item will come back to you on a future consent calendar.
Does it make any sense to just wait and do it all at the same time?
There was no reason for us to do that. It's a minor administrative function on the staff side of the House once the council votes it up or down.
The only reason I wonder about that for the council is just in terms of paperwork and that it would all be in the same place should anybody have any reason to look it up.
Yeah, all the side letters, what happen is they just get attached to the original governing contract, and then in the next iteration of the contract, they would just be incorporated into the main body.
Okay, very good. So no problem.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Crystal, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. That brings us to 9A, unfinished business, consideration of adopting a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute an amendment to the professional services agreement with Ross Trulis Quisenberry in the amount of $136,429 for the Adult Community Center Interior Remodel Project C9322.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Jeff Maltby, City Manager. I'll be presenting this item to you this evening. As you know, in fact, I'm going to need a clicker here. As you know, this item has been before the council several times, as a matter of fact, and was on your last agenda where there were some questions that had arisen about the architect's design fees. We've had an opportunity to sit down with Councilmember Grisilli, who was very generous in his time in coming in and meeting with us so we could go over some of the detail. But in general, I'd like to just back up a little bit and talk about the project's history. As I said just a moment ago, this project's been before the council a number of times and was talked about in several different contexts, which included the possibility of leveling the facility and building a new community center and aquatic center on the site. Council looked at that conceptually and chose to move forward with the remodel retrofit project for the adult community center. Originally, 2 years ago, this project was budgeted initially at $1.5 million. Though there were two other projects also in the budget that totaled approximately additional $150,000 to $200,000 related to the HVAC system. At the time that was originally, the original scope of the project was presented to the council conceptually and the architect was hired, the council felt that given some of the more bread and butter needs of the ACC, in other words, some leaking wall joints and a lot of ADA door handle type improvements, as well as improvements to the air handling HVAC system in the facility, was already basically taking up the entire $1.5 million project. The council at the time recognized that they had an opportunity to go a little bit further with the project since they were already going to be in there and opening up walls and doing a lot of work. And so they had asked staff to work with the architect to identify facility usage needs at the adult community center. And that was part of the original scope of work for the architect, who partnered with the staff, and we went out there and met with the stakeholders, including staff members that lead programs at the ACC. And they identified some additional scopes of work. Now, that work was not obviously included in the original contract with the architect. The original contract covered simply the scoping, looking for the additional work that the council might consider, as well as the original scope of the design, which, as I said before, was mostly behind-the-scenes back room type improvements that were the facility was in need of having made. This additional scope, which I'll go over a couple of highlights in just a minute, adds about $136,000 to the contract. And as a ratio of design cost to build cost was slightly different than the original services agreement. We were paying the architect about $125,000 to design about $1.2 million worth of actual physical improvements. The second expanded scope of the project is going to cost about $136,000 in additional design cost and adds about $750,000 of physical improvements to the facility. The primary difference there has to do with the type of work that the second phase is encompassing and the type of additional professionals that the architect is subcontracting with, engineers essentially. We've as part of the staff report and attachment 2, we've included some very specific breakdowns in terms of the various professional costs associated in the architect's agreement. This second phase will include things like wood flooring in the multi-purpose room, mirrors in the fitness room, outside patio concrete work, a demonstration island in the kitchen, access ramps to and from the facility on the park side, and a patio trellis replacement. We're recommending that we move forward with this project tonight to get the work underway, primarily because of the timing of the project. We'd like to be able to use 1245 San Carlos Avenue to be able to continue offering some of our ACC programming to the community while the facility is shut down. And as the council's aware, 1245 San Carlos Avenue is part of the Wheeler Plaza project, and at some point in the not too distant future is likely to be demolished as that project begins. If we can move forward tonight, we're confident that we can get the ACC project underway and complete in advance of the Wheeler Plaza project. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions or have staff answer any questions that the council might have.
Thank you, Jeff. Are there any questions for staff? Okay. Seeing none, is there anybody, I don't have any cards, but is there anybody who wishes to address the council on this item? Okay. I will entertain a motion if anybody would like to make one.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move to adopt Resolution 2014-113, a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos authorizing the city manager to execute an amendment to the professional services agreement with Ross Julius Kusenberry in the amount of $136,429 for the Adult Community Center Interior Remodel Project C9322.
I second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Make a comment?
You certainly can, sir.
I wanted to thank the staff for taking the time to detail out all the items on this. I really do appreciate it. I was the one who brought up a lot of the questions. They were all answered in the meeting as well as with this detail. And I also want to make sure that everyone understands that there was nothing in my comments to not approve this last time that had anything to do with not wanting to approve the remodel of the Adult Community Center. Big supporter of that, but I just wanted to make sure that we understood all the dollars and cents that were going into it. So again, thanks to staff for doing all this heavy lifting for me.
And I'll add that as well, I'm looking forward to approving this and moving it along. With that, Crystal, would you call the roll, please? Oh, sorry, Matt, did you wish to say something?
Yeah, I just turned on my
Oh, go for it.
thing. So I am a little surprised I wasn't given the chance to come in and talk with staff because I had some of the same questions. And now the numbers are more broken down. I'm still not pleased with it. And I think there are things like the contingencies are, in both cases, 13.5% high. It says here that it should be about, it's approximately 10%, but it's 13% over what it would be if it were 10%. And, you know, generally architect fees come in at about 10% of construction cost. So if you strip this thing down, construction costs are about, if I do my math correctly, about $2 million, and architect fees should come in at around $200,000, and instead they're at $370,000. So I don't know what's going on here, but I think we're paying too much. I too am in favor of the senior or the adult community center project, but I'm not in favor of these costs that we're taking on. So I'm not willing to vote yes on it because I think we're paying too much for what we're getting.
Any comment from staff?
Well, I think the only comment I would make is that when we look at it, because the council had specifically asked for the scoping work to be done, and that's actually a significant component when you look at I think you said it was a $300,000 number, Matt. With the actual design itself, it's, I believe, about $250. $260.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? Then, Crystal, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. Okay, that brings us to new business. Item 10A, consideration of adopting a resolution approving a professional services agreement with TBWB Strategies and appropriating $117,730 for election consulting and election polling in preparation for a possible revenue measure, and appropriating $30,542 for community meeting facilitation. And I do have to ask staff, I mean, I'm fascinated, these things are out to the dollar?
You may have a contract already, so.
Just waiting approval. Okay, fair enough. Tara, good evening.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council. My name is Tara Peterson. I'm the Assistant to the City Manager. Here before you this evening is a request that you approve a contract with TBWB Strategies, along with appropriating $117,730 to cover the costs for election consulting and election polling in preparation for a possible revenue measure, and also appropriating $30,542 for a community meeting facilitator. Hopefully I can get this to work. There we go. So just as a reminder, at the strategic planning session in September, Council identified a number of projects that it would like to see move forward based upon communications from various community members, and they're listed here. I won't go through the whole list. We're familiar with them. But one of the problems with doing these projects is just the high cost. So funding is a question. So what we did was put together some preliminary dates and events that will take place depending upon how things go. This is kind of just a formula. But if things change and the opinions come in that people aren't interested in us pursuing these things, things may change. So November, this month, we'd like to enter into contracts with the consultants to initiate the outreach for the community meetings, as well as get the polling consultant as well as the election consultant on board to start considering things that will be done for a survey. So in December of 2014, we'll continue the outreach for the meetings and also begin the preliminary work on the survey. In January, we'll conduct a series of open community meetings and use this input to help us finalize the survey questions. In February, we'll launch the survey and compile the data collected for presentation to the council for it to determine if it wants to proceed with revenue measure, and if so, we would then look at hiring additional consultants to advise the city on moving forward. In March, we would start outreach to the community with the updated information on the survey results as well as council's decision. And we would do that for several months. And then in June or July, that time frame, we would conduct a second survey to see what the level of support for a revenue measure may be. Oops, I hit the wrong button, Crystal. There it goes. Yay. In July, August, we'll have council consider approving the ballot language for a possible measure and submitting it to the county by the deadline in August. And finally, if all goes forward, then an election would be held in November 2015. So the action recommended this evening, again, just the approval of the contract with TBWB for election consulting and polling, and also the appropriation of funds for the contract and for a community meeting facilitator, community focus, for $30,542. We have the consultants here this evening, but just by way of introduction, I thought I would tell you a little bit about TBWB as well as Godby Research. TBWB specializes in revenue measure feasibility, planning, measure development, and public outreach. They have extensive experience in San Mateo County with successful measures. And they also have years of experience with city measures very recently in Palo Alto, Salinas, and San Rafael. And Godby Research, they will partner with TBWB on this potential measure, as it has on other revenue measures for other agencies. Godby specializes in public opinion research and voter polling for revenue measures. They're located in San Mateo, and they've been the pollster for more than 50 successful revenue measures in the county of San Mateo alone. With that, we will let the consultants introduce themselves and then questions after. Does that sound like a good plan? All right, great. Jared, would you like to begin? And she'll have that up. You just push that.
Okay, thanks, Jared. Thank you, Mayor, council members. I'm Jared Boygan with TBWB Strategies. My colleague Brian Godby with Godby Research is here as well. I'll talk briefly for a couple of minutes, introduce our planning methodology, and Brian will talk a little bit about the survey process, and then, of course, either one of us will be available for questions. As Tara mentioned, we're very familiar with the community of San Carlos. We've had the pleasure of working with the school district since 2009 on a number of local revenue elections, so we're very familiar with your community, with your electorate. Obviously, we've had lots of other local experience. TBWB is a little bit of a different kind of political firm in that we believe that successful revenue measures are those that involve a great deal of community discussion, dialogue, consensus, and transparency, and that ultimately what you bring forward to the voters will be strongest if you have a period of voter input and feedback in creating it. And so by the time something comes forward to you as council to put on the ballot, you can have confidence that your community stands behind what you're bringing forward, and it's been through that process. So the process in a broad way is illustrated on this slide. The advocacy campaign is the very last of the 4 steps that you can see there, and that's what many of us think about when we think about revenue measures. We think about all the hard work that goes into campaigns, lawn signs, and phone banks, and fundraising, and mailers. But we believe that the work that happens in those first 3 steps is just as, if not more important than what happens in those last 3 months. And that's where you are today, is embarking on the beginning of that process. And as Tara pointed out in her timeline, if we target a November 2015 potential election date, obviously nobody is committing to being on the ballot by anything you do today. There's a long process in front of you. Council would have until next summer to decide that question. But you have all these months in front of you in order to do this transparent community engagement process. So the feasibility study would be the very first step. Brian Godby of Godby Research will talk a little bit about the voter survey, but you also have the privilege of working with a community facilitator. You've got, as I understand from staff, a Davenport Institute grant to do some community outreach and community engagement. We went through that process very recently in the city of Salinas, which, while it has a lot of differences from San Carlos, we found that to be, very useful part of the process. It's a much broader process usually than just narrowly focused on a revenue measure. The kinds of things you get out of the Davenport meetings are very broad, very broad input from citizens related to their priorities and things that they like to see from the city that's not necessarily the narrower package of things that they want to pay for in a revenue measure. And that is, one of the sort of layers of complexity that we'll be working with staff to help guide you through, is how do we take the broad set of community priorities and narrow them into a measure that people maybe want to pay for and invest their dollars in. But early on, we'll be doing this feasibility study, and some of those early community meetings that are professionally facilitated will generate some ideas that will then turn into a voter survey, and we'll figure out kind of how those fit into the priority pecking order for people and what they want to pay for, and whether they do at all. And so at the end of that feasibility study, we'll have a red light, green light moment where we'll bring the results of Brian's voter survey forward along with the results of those meetings, and you may find at that point that you don't want to proceed any further towards a revenue measure, and that would be fine. And that's, certainly possible, and some jurisdictions do that. If, on the other hand, the polling and the community outreach has been favorable to that point, and you decide you want to proceed at least with the next phases of planning, then we would continue to work with you on additional community engagement. And it's useful to think of it in terms of concentric circles. You've got a small group of people who will receive like a phone or email survey from Brian. He'll describe that methodology. You have a slightly broader group of voters or residents who would be included in some of the community facilitated meetings. And then you've got the voters as a whole, and we like to try and work with you and staff to engage that broader group in a very transparent way in order to gain their input and make sure that whatever you're considering doing, everybody's heard about it and has a chance to weigh in and ask questions. So that would be the next process. Then we would use that input from all of those concentric circles to help you craft a ballot measure, work through the ballot resolution drafting, vet it publicly, to be transparent, and all that would happen before you're actually asked to place the measure on the ballot. So broadly stated, that's the process. And this contract would authorize all of it, although at any point staff can stop the process, and that would be the end of it. So Brian, you want to talk a little bit about the major part of the first step from our perspective, which is the voter survey.
Thank you, Jared. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'm happy to be here to talk a little bit more about this process. There we go. At the top level, and Jared referred to this already, what do you get out of a survey? First is this feasible, and should you go through this entire process? That's one of the things the polling will tell us. It'll also tell us about the election timing. November 15 is one of many options. Obviously, there are more elections in 2016 as well, and we will, during our kickoff process, talk about those opportunities in addition to the November 15, which would be the most immediate. The survey also gives us some information to go to those stakeholder consensus building meetings. It says, here's what the community thinks, not just the people in those rooms. And then, of course, there is messaging information for the ballot questions and arguments and subsequent efforts. In terms of the process that we're going to go through, it starts with a kickoff meeting. We're working with Jared and staff and whoever else, council members most generally. We go back and forth about the issues. We saw the broad level of things that you're interested in funding with a bond measure, but we need to dig into the details. We'll look at existing data. We know, of course, there was a sales tax measure on the ballot in 2009. It's important to look at that and try to tease that apart. Then we could work in drafting the instrument, and that's a iterative process where we go back and forth with your community. Jared and I have obviously done this dozens and dozens, hundreds of times, and literally. So we have the methodology that we want to use, but, we know a lot about San Carlos based on our experience, and as you probably know, I was born and raised in San Mateo County, so I know more about this county than any other pollster alive. It's safe to say. But I'm not an expert in San Carlos. You are. So we want to go back and forth in that process to develop a survey instrument. From there, the sampling design happens sort of consecutively with the instrument. And what we've discovered in the last year is that middle-aged voters, people my age, in their 50s, have stopped answering their landlines. It happened almost uniformly across the state at the beginning of this year. And what that means is for years we've relied on them because they registered to vote 20 years ago, they've been in the same place forever, and they answered their phones, and that was great. When they registered to vote 20 years ago, they didn't give us their cell phone. They gave us their landline. Now they have cell phones now, and we subsequently match the voter file to get cell phone numbers, but it's not a perfect match. And as some of you might know, when we presented data to the school district several weeks ago, we did a hybrid survey. And so our sample was not just telephone surveys. In big cities like San Jose or San Francisco, you can still do a telephone survey to get 400 completes. In smaller communities like this, you can't because of this phenomenon. And so in the school district's case, we actually did 269 internet surveys. And 132 telephone surveys. And they were done sequentially like that. Now, in the school district's case, they have a list of parents. In most cities' cases that we've done work in, you have park and rec lists, you have library lists. We don't care what books people read. That's important to say. But you do, people register for library cards. They give you their email address. So there's a lot of sources that you have that we can match with the voter file to get an email address and improve the voter file just like we did for the school district. And that gives us a good list to work with for the email part of the survey. And the sample design is built on that assumption. Then we're into the pre-testing part of the process, and then fielding, which of course is the internet and the telephone. We do the internet first, and then our methodology says, well, who did we get? and what clusters, because the whole sample is stratified by age, gender, partisanship, and geography by precinct within the city. So which groups did we get and which groups do we need to get? Very often we get younger in the internet portion and into that middle age group. It's the seniors that are still, while they're conversant, my father-in-law is in his mid-80s and is on the internet for hours every day, they still don't seem to respond to those kinds of emails as much as they do pick up their phone, their landline, that is. So that's the process in terms of the field. It does take longer than it used to. In the old days, we could do a survey like this in 3 or 4 days. We can't do that anymore. It just takes more time to do this sequentially. Then we're into the analysis and reporting, presentation of findings, and then working with you and Jared to make a decision on a go, no-go, and then moving forward from there. That's a quick overview of the process. Certainly happy to answer any questions you might have for either Jared or I.
Jared and Brian. Questions for staff and the consultants? Bob.
These are a little technical, but I'm the king of acronyms in this town. And to be quite honest, I would like to know what TBWB stand for and who the principals are, because I don't think I've never met you, Mr. Boygan, but I might have met some of these other people and maybe even work with them. And that would be a possible issue. So I'd just like to know who they are.
So the 4 initials are Michael Terrace, Barry Barnes, Erica Walters, and Jared Boygan, which is me. We have 2 other principals, Sarah Stern, Benoit, and Charles Heath. Sarah probably be your lead contact. She's been working most closely with staff on this and has worked with several nearby cities. But
I don't know any of those people or you. I just wanted to make sure, because sometimes along the way you bump into people. I guess another question I had was, you said Davenport meeting. I'm not familiar with that term.
Tara, question.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
When we first realized we want to do some community outreach and community meetings, I applied for a grant. It's through the Davenport Institute out of Pepperdine University.
Okay.
And we were awarded one of the grants. So they'll provide us some training and guidance on how to how to increase public engagement through community meetings.
I missed that. I thought you meant maybe like Chesterfield or Couch or Davenport. Anyway, that's an old joke.
Right. Matt.
So the question I have is the contract here, which looks like if you combine the two, it's about $148,000. That's in our staff report. $117,700 for election and consulting. And then there's a $30,000.
Right. There are 2 contracts. Okay. One would be for community meeting facilitation. It's $30,000, so it didn't need to come to council for approval. Mm-hmm. The one that did need to come back combines these 2 gentlemen's services into one contract for $117,000 and change.
Oh, okay. All right. And that takes it through this whole process?
Through the entire process. So it's a not to exceed amount. If we decide to stop at any point, then the costs stop.
So can they tell us how many hours they estimate they've got into this?
Well, it's a combination. I think there might be up to 2 voter surveys in that number. Right. There's potential for community mailings and other kind of engagement tools, like they might have a tear-off survey or some other kind of engagement implement, and then obviously time. We don't usually track time and hours. As a political firm, we found that it's actually better if people, pick up the phone and call us when they need to, rather than be worried about the clock. The more complicated something is, the more you should probably be on the phone with us. So it's not really about hours. We tend to do it on a more of a retainer basis, and that's consistently been our arrangement with other cities as well as the school district.
So then explain, if I understand retainers, and you had said, we get partway through this and we say, this is not looking good, we're not going to go forward. How do we estimate where we are contractually?
The first phase is feasibility, and there's a flat fee associated with that along with the cost of the first survey. And if at that point you wanted to stop, that would be all you'd be in for. After that, our retainer is a monthly, and so you can basically, if somebody stops it, it tends to break down as a per diem, over the monthly pro rata. And then if
I could interrupt for just a second, if I could ask Tara to come to the mic. We've actually done some of this modeling already, so we have a specific answer. That's okay.
So for TVWB, for the first 3 months of the program would be a flat fee of $6,500. For every month after that, it would be $7,500
Per month?
per month.
So
And they're
6,500
estimating about 6 months for this process.
$6,500 per month, first 3 months. Is that right?
Yes.
And then $7,500 after that?
$6,500 flat fee for the first 3 months, not per month. So $6,500 will get us from now till January.
I didn't see that in here. Okay.
And then $7,500 after that. We would only be obligated to the $6,500 if we were to cease the process during the first 3 months.
Okay. And then I have one last question. Define consensus building.
In our work, the key touchstones are really transparency and accountability. So obviously you're never going to find perfect consensus. It's a democracy. People have different opinions. People express them. So by consensus, we're looking for broad public consensus behind ideas. That doesn't mean perfect consensus, but it means if you've communicated transparently about specific ideas, so you have some goals and concepts. Let's say street and traffic improvements, let's just say. That's very popular in a lot of cities on the peninsula. And let's suppose through your community meetings and through your voter survey and through community engagement tools that might involve use of your website, electronic media, or an old-fashioned tear-off survey mailer for those who don't like to do it on the internet but still like to write things on postcards and send them to elected officials. Let's say street and traffic improvements were at the top of the list every one of those times. And let's say that happened in the context of discussions that also involved a potential tax measure of some sort. So we said, hey, we're thinking about a potential revenue measure, and these are some of the things it might fund. And we found from all different sources and all different kinds of conversation that people ranked that set of improvements very highly and important to address in context of discussion about a potential revenue measure. We would come back to you and say, to us that looks like broad consensus, that a lot of people believe that for some amount of money they would like to see you make some improvements in this set of priorities.
So, if I can interrupt, and what I'm hearing is when it says here build consensus as one of the arrows, that strikes me as, red flags are going up. I'm thinking of what's going on in Menlo Park right now that's in the papers. Electioneering, essentially, through a consultant. Not good. We don't want that here in San Carlos. But what I'm hearing from you is, while it's called build consensus, I think what I'm hearing from you is more consensus data evaluation, looking where there is consensus, putting those together in this bucket and saying, okay, it looks like we've got some consensus here, and here's the data on it. 80% of those polled said they really care about traffic, 20% say they care about this, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, that's right. And we may also add some information, to them that they may not already have, right? Like this is the state of deterioration of the local streets and roads, or, something of that nature. But that's right. I mean, that's, perhaps it could be better stated than build consensus, but
that's what
analyze consensus. Yeah.
Okay.
Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to come at this from a little bit different angle. I'm curious of what measures you worked on that didn't work, and what did you learn from them?
What do you want to take I'm happy to take a swing at that too, but
Yeah.
go ahead.
We, Godby Research had 22 measures on the ballot in this last November. We won 21 of them. The one that we didn't was the Sonoma County Library sales tax measure. And it was a countywide measure. It got 62%. So in most cases, people say that's an overwhelming victory. Of course, it requires 2/3, so it was a 5% loss. Several things happened there after we suggested that it go on the ballot. One, the Board of Supervisors elected to carve out the percentage that they wanted for a future roads tax. And so it became complicated. The library is vote yes on this, and you may get it if the sales tax cap is increased sometime in the future by the state legislature. That's a lot of ifs. for voters to handle. In addition to that, and again after the board put it on the ballot, the fundraising for the campaign effort, which is completely partisan, obviously, not in a Democrat-Republican sense, but obviously it's not something the county or the city could engage in with public funds. It was just limited. And to win a 2/3 measure, there has to be a substantial campaign effort, and there has to be consent. That's one of the things we look for, is there a consensus to put this on the ballot. So those are the two things off the top of my head. We're still picking that one apart. But I think the problem with saying we'll get you the cap if you win and, trust us is not a good recipe for success.
All right. The other question I had was, how close has your pre-election polling come to actual results? I mean, do you get to a point where you say to us, this thing's a slam dunk, or you may want to think twice about going any further? I mean, at what point do you just get very frank with one of your clients and say, we don't think this is going to work?
Yeah, we are always very frank. We'll never say it's a slam dunk. In politics, nothing is ever, as you all know. But we are candid. This year, we actually did more work this year than in any year before that didn't make it to the ballot. So I had bond measures in Beverly Hills that didn't get to the ballot. I had sales taxes in Marin that didn't get to the ballot because we just weren't there. We like to look at the error rate in a survey, and ideally, if you need 2/3 and you've got a 5% error rate, you got to have 73% to be comfortable. Now, it's a risk-reward analysis, and that's part of the conversation that we'll engage with. If you're not at 73% or 72%, depending on how you do the math and round it, we may say, well, it's tight, but it's positive, and there's a risk-reward. Are you willing to take that on? In other cases, and the two that I mentioned, we weren't even making the error rate. We were below the threshold we needed without it. So we said, this is probably not going to work, and you need to work on it further before bringing it to the voters. And those are just the two that come to my mind. There's a whole handful of others that didn't make it this year.
I promise I only have a couple more.
I wasn't looking at you to stop. Feel free. Keep going.
Is it better to do these kinds of elections in certain election years? This, I guess, next year the only way I can characterize it is sort of an off year, rather than a midterm or a general election where there's a presidential election or gubernatorial or something like that.
There's a very important city council election next year, Rob.
Yes, I'm aware of that. So I'm just wondering, what your feelings are on those kinds of elections.
Well, that's one of the things that the poll will help us answer, because we can look at different election environments, and particularly in small communities, it sometimes is helpful to look at those different environments just to get enough interviews completed. And so looking at a November 2016 and a November 2015 can be done in the same survey and give you that answer from a quantitative perspective. What I think, if you look at our experience in San Carlos with the school district, you'll find that before we were retained in November 2008, they didn't get 2/3. Then in May of 2009, we did get 2/3. So those are wildly different election types. And somewhat reverse of what some people might typically think. They'd think the bigger the election, the more younger people and the more likely you are you get to the 2/3 required for school measure. Obviously, that's not the case for the school district. But the survey will help us answer that question. It will.
Okay. And I would say this, I'm sorry, Councilman, I'd add this to in San Carlos, we found to be a very thoughtful community. It's a community of engaged citizens to a large degree, and people put some thought and time into things. And so I think one of the things we've seen in the past is that sometimes those big electorates, the local measures kind of can get lost a little bit, and there has been some benefit to being able to engage citizens in an off cycle where there aren't as many competing things on the ballot. There are other factors to that, and the local climate matters quite a bit. when you go into it. And so one of the things that you'll be learning in addition to the voter survey is, as we listen to the public and we hear what the community feedback is, we may find that the timing is not right for this particular proposal, or that the timing will be right with a little bit more information, or if the public had a little bit more sense of what kind of improvements you had in mind, or they thought, the plan had a little bit more time to mature, or something like that. So there's lots of factors that go into that timing.
All right. And my last question is, it sounds like, and I think you alluded to it, polling's a lot harder these days because some people use landlines, some don't. Some have cell phones, some don't. You can't get all cell phone numbers. I'm wondering about the whole email aspect of it. I mean, you have a sort of a strategy so that an email that contains a survey is less likely to go to junk and more likely to be read?
We can't address the filters. If people have filters that are whitelisting or blacklisting, we can't do anything about that. What we've been successful with, though, is having an email come from the city and the city manager. It doesn't come from Godby Research with Godby Research's domain name on it. It comes with a reply to address that is yours. So that's more likely to get through. The other kinds of things that get spammed out are win and free and those sorts of things, which are typically not surveys. Those are more commercial marketing efforts. And so obviously we're not doing those. Although having said that, we did a county-wide measure for commute.org, or county-wide survey for commute.org that was an email survey to voters. There's lots of voters in the county, obviously. We got 650 completes. We did have a contest in it, but it wasn't in the subject line. It was buried well into the text, and it didn't say free. So those are the ways you try to avoid getting spammed out. But I think the primary is it's from the city. It's not from some obscure research organization.
All right. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Ron. Matt, I see you had another question or questions.
Not for these guys, though. More for staff.
Oh, feel free.
So the thing I'm curious about is, especially having gone on the tour today, I was hoping there might be a way to break this down a bit, because I have a personal, for myself, I don't know, we can discuss it as a council, but I have a strong interest in that property, and especially after going on the tour. And in fact, I mentioned some things to Al Savay that might be useful to do to gauge the interest of the community, because I think the community has zero idea what's there. And in fact, I've had discussions with people who have a perspective on that property that, just like mine before I went into it, was wrong. So I was sharing with Al that there might be some interesting ways to communicate to the community what's on that site and what might be a benefit to our community to purchase that land and turn it into a park and so forth. But that's a whole separate project, it seems to me, and that's the kind of thing, again, I guess it's for council to discuss. It's a long question, excuse me, but for me, before we go into this whole polling thing, I'd like to know from our community, what's your interest in this particular property, and if we were to get that property, then the project that would ensue, and then how that would affect this. And that's frankly, that's the only reason I'm willing to spend any money at all on what we're doing here, because a lot of these other things, for me, if you were to poll me, I'm going to say community poll, not too interested. Some of these other things, not too interested. But that particular property, very interested.
So thank you, Councilmember Grocott, and welcome to my world. The really fun and exciting thing about what the council is looking to do here is that the council's not looking to do anything specifically. The council's looking to listen to the community. And I'm sure if your day is anything like my day, you inevitably come across one or two people who say, hey, what would be great to have in San Carlos? It'd be great to have more field space. It'd be great to have a swimming pool. It'd be great if the city took care of street trees. It'd be great if we had more parking downtown. It would be great if we had more open space. There are a lot of greats. And what I like about the approach that the council has taken is that you've said, look, I may have my favorite, and, Bob may have his favorite, and Mark may have his favorite, and Ron and Cameron may have their favorites. But what's really important here is that we get in front of the community, that we really publicize these meetings that we're going to have in January, that we really go in with an open mind to say, what is it you want? This isn't like the tax measures that the city put forward in the OOs, right, which were, hey, we need your help to pay for our continuing services. This is more, hey, look, we're hearing from you that you might be interested in adding some nice-to-haves to San Carlos, and we want to make sure that we get you, the community, the nice-to-haves in front of you and give you the opportunity to tell us, what do you want on this ballot, and how much do you want to pay? And, I think, to the extent that you have some ideas about Black Mountain specifically, I think we definitely want to hear them, because I think those are the types of things we want to build into our community meetings, where the council has identified some specific things they'd like to get the feedback from the community on. But we also want to hear from the community if there's other things that aren't on the list that they think should be. And then we're going to go out and test them all and come back and tell you, hey, here's how, people feel. And, one thought that's occurred to me is that Black Mountain may want to have sort of an open house for the community that we can all publicize so that lots of people can have an opportunity to go up and take a tour and see that property.
I just had, actually, I think most of my questions are probably for Brian and Jared, so you can relax for a minute. Good to see you gentlemen again, by the way.
Nice to see you as well.
In a few years. Couple of things. I want to make sure I'm clear on the sequencing of the community dialoguing, which in fact Jeff was just talking about, and the polling, because I'm not sure. I mean, those are clearly synergistic.
Yeah.
So what's the rollout plan? How do they work together?
And we've talked a bit about this with staff already, because we had sort of the same question. And I think what we came down is that we were a little concerned that we might write a survey. We originally were going to start by trying to get some survey data right away so you'd have something to work from. But we were a little concerned that if we sat down and wrote a survey, no matter, how many people we include in the survey draft, that there may be some real good ideas that come out of those community meetings that we omit in the first survey if we draft it too soon. So what we thought we would do is let the community facilitation happen first and get those ideas from the community, and we'll have some participation and input, I think, into within the structure of how the professional facilitator wants to hold those meetings, but to have some input to help throw out maybe potential ideas that people have and make sure that those get considered. But that way we won't miss anything in the baseline survey draft that comes out of those meetings that you all and that staff think is important to consider and test.
That makes a lot of sense to me, and thank you. I wasn't clear about that. And that's a nice segue into my next question, which is, based on my experience at the school district with the tax measures and bond measures that they've done, my first reaction when I saw this is I agree with Jeff's observation, but I was thinking from the point of view of doing a survey and trying to draft measure. It's like, wow, this is very nebulous. So is that a source of concern for you? Have you dealt with similar things like that in other communities successfully, doing these community dialogues, feeding into the survey, and then sort of iterating it together in a...
I think that's one of the major interesting and challenging differences between cities and school districts, is a school district has a very clear mission. And so while there are different opinions about how you go about that mission, generally speaking, there's a pretty narrow and shared focus of what, needs to be accomplished. For the city, there's a lot of quality of life issues, and depending on which constituent you talk to at which moment in time, you're going to hear something different at the top of the list. And so it is important to have a little bit of a broader process and to take into account kind of all these different things of the city manager and city staff, and I'm sure all of you here in your everyday. And then, Brian's and my job is to help you kind of pare those down into, the want to haves or the nice to haves versus the are willing to pay fors or want to pay fors. And that's ultimately what the goal of this process is to identify, are there any want to pay fors, and are there several of them, or which ones are they, and how much is the want to pay for, and can you put that into a measure that the community will be happy to see in front of them. And that's ultimately the goal of this process. So it is a much broader process than you see sometimes in the school district, because the kind of the bucket full of questions is a much bigger bucket.
Brian, I have to admit I was smiling when you were talking about people not answering landlines because there's a couple of polling firms that, for whatever reason, they've gotten a hold of me, and they don't take no for an answer, even though I never answer my phone. So I can see on the caller ID who it is. So does that shift in how the public is communicating and interacting with polling firms, does that increase your error bars on this, or have you redesigned your process so that you basically get back down to the same thing, just a longer and more involved?
It doesn't impact the sampling error. We could spend a lot of time arguing about all the other discussing all the other errors that can be introduced into any kind of survey. And the one difference that is notable that I don't think anybody's decided on is in a telephone survey, we say, will you vote yes or no? And then we drill down, is that definitely or probably? We never give you the undecided option. We just say yes or no. Lots of people say, I'm undecided. In an internet survey, you can't do that because you want to lock them into answering that question in some fashion, so you can't have this mystery response that's I don't know that works on the telephone, because somebody can say I don't know, and the interviewer looks down their list and says, oh yeah, there it is, and they check that box on their computer screen. So in the telephone survey and the internet surveys, we offer a not sure category, which is different than don't know. We never read don't know, those words in the phone survey, but that's what we've always called it. Not sure is I haven't made up my mind. Don't know is I'm not smart enough to figure it out. And so those words are different. And that's one of the things that is different. I don't think it's a major difference, but it's something that I look for and look to see, do we have a larger number of don't knows because we're offering it and people know it's there as an out to get to the next screen. So it's a pretty nuanced methodological concern. Stepping back, though, and looking at telephone versus internet, if you look at Nate Silver's analysis, not of this election because he hasn't finished it, but of the 2012 election, the single best survey on the presidential election 2012 was the Google Internet survey.
You're right.
Not any of the telephone surveys.
Yeah.
So there you go. But it is new territory. There's no question about that.
I would add this, which is to say that, as you know from your experience, the survey is a snapshot in time. You get the voter survey and things can happen between the survey and the election. And so part of the value of the rest of the process is to, while the quantitative data is going to come from Brian's work and everything else you get from the community is qualitative, it's anecdotal, it's what you hear, even in, a systematic facilitated community outreach session, still just based on who shows up and what they have in mind the day that they're there. So it's not quantitative data. But having as much of that community outreach and transparent engagement as you can have is the way that you avoid a lot of wild card dynamics between your survey and election day, because you know a lot more about what the community really thinks and feels, and your idea has been out there more broadly than just 125 phone calls and 250 internet emails. A lot of people have heard about it. So that's the value of the rest of the process, is to take some of that uncertainty out of there for you.
And I have just one other question, but thank you actually for mentioning that, because that reminded me I was going to point out when you gentlemen were talking before about November 2008, talking about things that happen out after the polling is done. Global economic collapse and a total freeze on liquidity in the worldwide economy is, an unusual event. It had a small impact on things, I suspect. So my last question is actually one that Matt was touching on, I think, from a different direction, and it actually relates to the observation that you made about how one of the differences between cities and school districts is that the mission is much broader. I often remind my former colleagues in the school board, that our environment here is much more politicized. Okay, I jokingly tell them there's nothing that we could do that there wouldn't be somebody in San Carlos who would write me a nasty email saying that was the dumbest thing I ever heard of the council doing. Because of that, to me, that would seem to put a premium on making sure that we're careful that we're not using public funds in terms of lobbying. Okay, and I know your charts all segregate the segments and stuff, but I am a little, concerned is the wrong word. I just would like to understand how you manage that, because this is a much more politicized environment, and I would imagine therefore it's a higher risk.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process of closely working with staff, with city officials, to understand kind of what the concerns of the community are, and then balance that with the quantitative research that we get to understand, what the concerns of the voters are, and to hear things from the community meetings. And there, certainly there, you never want to be trying to push the electorate into doing something that it doesn't want to do. So it's really more a process of digesting what is the input you're getting that's, purely anecdotal versus what's the input you're getting that is, supported by quantitative data and can help drive a decision-making process forward. So it isn't as much as, and certainly there are, situations where, an official might come forward and say, gosh darn it, I want this, particular kind of, police tax or something on the ballot, and it's got to go that way. And then, you could have, consultants just, hammer home, safety, police, et cetera, et cetera. This process that we use is a different process. We're actually trying to hear from the community about what they think is important, and then our role is to really help you kind of sift through the things that you might hear from one or two kind of very strident folks versus things that really appeal to a broader group. And we're going to be using the quantitative data primarily, but also the other kinds of outreach tools to help kind of bolster that.
That's a pretty important point, I think, is that you're not driving the message so much as trying to hear what's there.
It's important to, you hear things and you hear things, and so what are the things that are shared things, and not everybody gets to come to council meetings and, they state their opinion. So we're trying to kind of figure out from a lot of different vantage points of information gathering and information presenting, because people, have imperfect information always, and you need to try and kind of add some important facts, for people to consider, knowledge about the property, for example. So, you do want to put some information out there that you think is important and relevant so that they have, needed information to make an informed decision. But at the same time, you really are just trying to sift through, what's quantitatively supported and what is a broad community priority, that people are willing to pay for.
Okay. Thank you. Ron, I see you have another question you wanted to ask.
Yes, I did. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just sort of a final question here, at least for me. At what point do you get to, here's how much it's going to cost, folks? Or the other question I thought of was, how much are you willing to pay to have this park? Or this pool, or these soccer fields? When does that come into the process?
That's also part of an iterative process. I know certainly when we put the survey together, Brian's going to need some baseline cost data from the city staff, because you can't ask the voters to, consider a potential revenue measure without them having some idea of what it will cost them. So we'll need some initial baseline, numbers about that. But, things like land purchases, in my experience, that's kind of a moving target often. And so there's a lot of times when certain numbers aren't ready to be said publicly. They're not real yet, or they're, not that far along in the process. So, there kind of isn't a hard and fast rule other than saying we'll have to be at a point early in the process where we make some numbers public in order for Brian to test them. In my experience with the Davenport group that gave you a grant for your public outreach, they do like to do some economic priority setting with voters, and so sometimes there's a little bit of a cost analysis that goes into that process. I don't know if that's what they have in mind for you, but I've seen that in the past before. So sometimes you have to put some numbers out there just to let people analyze, well, if we only had $5 million, what would we do with the $5 million, and this costs this and this costs that, and how would you prioritize? So, that's one element. And then the other kind of piece of guidance that we tend to give our clients as we go is don't shortchange cost on the front end. Overestimate what you think it might be if you're not certain. Publicize the higher range of your estimates. It is always harder to raise the cost in the public's mind than it is to lower the cost later. So if you tell them a community pool is going to cost $1 million, and then later on, as you start to put the malum measure together, it's 1.8, it's going to put you in a trickier spot than if you came out in the first place and said it might be 2, and then you come back later and it's 1.8, it's a little bit less, and we can put $200,000 in the library or something like that. You know what I mean? So you setting expectations is probably the biggest piece of it.
Thank you.
Other questions for staff or consultants? I don't have any speaker cards, but is there anybody? Bonnie, I will ask you to fill out, or you have filled out. Great.
She knows the drill.
I was going to say you know the drill, so I won't bother telling you. Thank you. Bonnie McClure, 2 minutes.
Okay. I just have a question. And if I'm answering a survey, I want to know, this is fine for the city, but I want to know what else is out there that we're going to have to be paying for on a district or county-wide basis, such as the water treatment plant and other things that might be environmentally important, but they are a regional question. And so when I'm asked, just because it hasn't been mentioned, I think, oh, that's all I'm going to ask for. And, when you're 83, you're very conservative about how you're going to spend your money. And so I would like to see the city give us some education before we are asked some of these questions, because the plant, the sewer treatment plant, different things like that are going to cost us on a regional basis, and my answer would be different.
Thank you, Bonnie. See, starts up. All right. With that, is there anybody else who wishes to address the council? Didn't see any. I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, make a motion to approve resolution, or is it introduced? Is it approved?
Adopt.
Excuse me. Adopt resolution number 2014-
114.
I'm sorry.
114.
114. Resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos approving a professional services agreement with TBWB Strategies and appropriating $117,730 for election consulting and election polling in preparation for a possible revenue measure, and appropriating $30,542 for community meeting facilitation.
Is there a second? A second. There is a motion and a second. Discussion.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question that'll help me to vote on this, because I very much want to move forward on the first part of it, but I'm still a little unclear on how it comes to council in such a way that we can stop the process if we so choose along the way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think Jeff wants to try.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit, Matt. So basically, in my mind, the plan that I think is the most likely scenario right now is that we're going to, assuming that the council takes this action tonight, we're going to begin working with our consultants and the staff to plan the community meetings in January and, get as much publicity and information out there to the community to try to get as many people involved in those community meetings as possible, using all our various public outreach tools that we have to get them in the door to have this dialogue with us. While we're doing that, we'll be sort of designing some of the basic elements, the standard elements of the survey tool. And then once we have the community meetings, we'll populate it with more specific information. Here's kind of what we look like, what everything looks like. Likely we'll come back to council with at least a report on the community meetings, depending on the timing, before we do the survey. We do the survey, and then we bring back the results. Here's, a big report on the community meetings. Here's the survey results. And at that point in time would be, I think, the most likely when the council could say, look, the community, 15% of the community really likes a swimming pool and 20% of the community really likes downtown parking, but there just doesn't seem to be any consensus there in terms of something to put on the ballot. The council pulls the plug at that point and we stop the process. Or the council looks at it with the advice of their consultants and the staff and says, boy, these one or two things, Black Mountain really looks like people in this town are willing to sort of join together and purchase this property to preserve it for future generations. And, they also really want more parking in their downtown, more free parking in their downtown. And those seem to be the two big priorities that they'd like to move forward on. That'll be the point where the council really starts to craft, this is what the bond measure or the tax measure, whatever it is going to be or not be at that point. So hopefully in that February, March timeframe, we'll have some specific answers to your questions.
Okay. So, and just not really a discussion item, Mr. Mayor, but just a comment. And it alludes to what you were saying earlier and what I had asked about as well. I'm strongly interested in knowing if there's anything the community wants to bond, go into a bond measure for. Because let's face it, when you do a bond measure, you're paying for the capital and a huge amount of interest. So You don't do those things lightly, and you don't do them for things like computers that are going to be outdated tomorrow. But for big projects, I can see how it makes sense. And that's what I'm interested in. So I'm very wary about any arm twisting or over information putting on people to try and convince them that this is the right thing to do. I just really want to know what's the pulse of the community on this kind of thing. And I would think that's what the rest of us want too, but I just feel the need to say it because I feel strongly about it.
Any other comments? If not, Crystal, please call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. And Jeff, I don't know if you heard the grinding of my teeth when you use that phrase, free parking. There is no such thing as free parking. It's just who's paying for it when. Thank you very much, everyone. Tonight, we're going to adjourn our meeting in recognition of a very long-serving public servant who was also a resident of the San Carlos community who passed away just within the last couple of days, who also, interestingly enough, I was not aware of this, he was the San Carlos city attorney for 17 years. So he was the Greg Rubens before there was a Greg Rubens. I understand that Greg actually used to deliver his newspaper to him when Greg was running his news route. I'm speaking, of course, of Mel Cohn. I think a lot of you probably knew Mel. I unfortunately didn't really get to know him. As I've been reading about him a little bit, I wish I had, because apparently there are all sorts of interesting Mel Cohn stories. And he sounds like the kind of guy I would like to have known. But he was an honored public servant. He was a great San Carlin. He will be missed. They're going to have a memorial service for him on his birthday next January 23rd in the county courthouse museum in Redwood City. And Greg, I was going to offer you an opportunity if you wish to say anything else to add to that.
Well, I'd just like to say, Mel was a real mentor to me as a young attorney, joining Aronson Dickerson, and his vast experience as a city attorney is still reflected in our municipal code. Many of the codes he wrote in the 50s when he was the city attorney are still there. So I think that might be a testament to his skill as a city attorney. And he, as a judge, I never practiced before him because he retired before I became an attorney, but those are a big part of the stories, I suspect, his role as a Superior Court judge in San Mateo County. And he will be, again, respected. And the courts did adjourn the day of his death early in honor of his service there. So. And
I know Ron wants to say something in a minute here. I'll turn the mic over to him. But I presume as you've been cleaning up various of our municipal code sections, they probably weren't any of his, right? Just kidding. Oh. Ron.
I would just like to add that I joined the Kiwanis Club of San Carlos in 1987. Mel Cohn was a longtime member. He obviously had been in the club for well over 30 years by the time I joined. And he was, in even his advanced years, very active in the club. Also a wonderful human being. There were times that, our family went through some things, and he was one of the most prominent in his support of us, and went out of his way to tell us that if there was anything he could do for us, that he would do it. And I really appreciate that. He was a wonderful man, and I miss him a lot. But on a happier note, I would like just make a note as we adjourn the meeting that tonight's my wife's birthday.
Well, happy birthday. Should we? No, I'm not going to offer to sing happy birthday to Gail because she might be listening to us, and that would be bad.
At the moment.
Oh,
She's at a singing group.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. So with that, we will adjourn our meeting in honor of Mel Cohn.